Mhm.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hi.
Good
Welcome
evening.
to this month's CrimeCraft. And tonight we're talking not so much about crime, but about the people who engage in crime and the prevention or the address of crime. We would not have, I don't know if you can all hear that little announcement or the little
Oh, there I am.
chime
Okay.
that says somebody's trying to come in. So as I
Yes.
stop and turn, I'm looking over at the list to admit. In any case, one of the, for me, one of the great joys of being a writer is coming up with characters. I absolutely love doing that. I don't, names just don't pop into my head. Sometimes they do, but generally I look at names. I sometimes choose names that reflect the ethnicity of a character. Sometimes I choose names that reflect the symbolism of a character. And I think I've mentioned before, I had a baby book when I was about 13, um, because I was writing stories and I wanted to name characters. So today, I'd like to talk about how we name characters, how we come up with characters, how we create characters, and let them fulfill the role that we design for them as the writer. I know from my work in the theater that, hold on, there's another admit. Uh, why am I not getting the admit? There it is. Um, our characters, I know from my time in the theater that characters are not just spear carriers. I know in some plays, you plays in the old day. We saw one recently. My better half and I. We went to Niagara on the Lake
Hmm.
in Ontario for the Shaw Festival, the theater festival that's held every year. And we went to see Agatha Christie's Witness for the Prosecution, which had some doubling, as it's called, when you have actors playing more than one part. But plays used to have 10, 12, 15 characters. And I think I was in a production once of Inherit the Wind. It had something like 23, 24 characters. And some of them, in our production, one guy had one line. He was a friend of the theater, and the director was putting him there. It was tough for him to do the one line. Sometimes he blew the one line, but we don't have that when we're writing books. We don't have limitations in characters, and in plays, you're limited. Most theater companies these days will not look at plays that have more than 5 or 6 characters.
Right.
So, if that's the case, when you create your character, you got to make the character count. It's not like the old days when they did the staging of Ben-Hur in the late 1890s, and they had a chariot race on stage, and they had a cast that was probably 30 or 40 people. And it's not like the big box musicals that tour the country. You can't do Wicked with 6 people. But when we're writing a story, because all stories are about people,
Right.
then how do we make our people special? How do we make them um, fulfill our needs? I'm going to talk a little bit about the process I use, which is not any official or sanctioned or recommended. I have had baby books. I sometimes use name generators to see how names sound. I sometimes, and whenever I say I want to hear how a name sounds, I will say it aloud. when I'm the only person in the room, just to see if it fits what's in the back of my mind as it begins to take shape. Sometimes I once had a character in a story named Nicholas, and the name Nicholas means victory of evil. And he was a gifted child who was going off to a special school, a gifted child from a poor neighborhood, and everybody was so excited to see him go. They were wishing him well, that he felt, as a child, a fair amount of pressure with that. And I thought the name Victory of the People was appropriate under the circumstances. It wasn't the same as something else I might have done. So I take pains to do that. Who is probably the best character namer in English fiction?
Charles Dickens.
Charles Dickens. Thank you, Vicki. Charles Dickens. His names, Ebenezer Scrooge, Pickwick, David Copperfield, the names he came up with were names that had a particular sound and sometimes created a picture. Now, the name Ebenezer, go ahead.
He named all his characters before he sat down to write the story. He knew their names, so he had their essence in mind before he started.
Yes. And that carries with it a power, I think, because if you don't know your character, and sometimes you don't know your character, raise your hand if you've ever created a character and then suddenly it's like, wait, he doesn't feel right, and you had to do something.
Oh,
which is to say all of us. So that idea of getting characters, I'm still admitting people for some reason, I think they changed this.
yeah, I had trouble with it, something.
Yeah, it used to be that the thing would just appear and I would admit all, and now suddenly it says waiting room, and I click and nothing happens, and then finally a name appears. Anyway, as we go through with something like Dickens, taking names, the names themselves have a certain immortality. The name Ebenezer, for example, was a legitimate name in its time period. But nobody names a child Ebenezer today. I suspect one of the reasons we don't is
because of Dickens.
Because of Dickens. Moving at one point in the early 20th century, in German certainly, but also in English, the name Adolf was a legit name. You know any baby Adolfs around these days? Because a name can be ruined for whatever circumstance. And so let's talk about that. I will give a brief story of how I came up with my detective's name, my character Gideon Rhymes. And then I'll let you take it over and we can talk about how you all name your characters. I was trying to come up with a series character, a series lead, and I played around with lots and lots of names. I didn't use a name generator, but I wrote lists of names. I looked in baby books. I looked at surnames. I looked at variants, spelling variants, and just played with one thing after another. And one thing I did, ultimately, with each name, I probably settled on 10 or 15 names. I Googled every name that I came up with, just to see if there was somebody with that name. And of course, for every single one, there was somebody with that name, at least one person. And I thought, okay. But then somewhere on the list was the name Gideon, biblical meaning warrior, and I wanted my character to have warrior qualities, and Rhymes. And I Googled that name, and there was no Gideon Rhymes. anywhere. I thought, okay, that's Providence telling me that that's the name. Because if anybody hears that name or anybody Googles that name, it comes into my character, my world. So I did that. And I'm still responding to people coming in. Among you, what are the names of some of your characters and how did you come up with those names?
Well,
Daniela? Okay.
Okay. Well, my series is the Emmeline Kirby Gregory Longden mystery series, and Emmeline is a name that I've always liked. That name, it rolls off the tongue. It has a lyrical, musical quality. She's a journalist, so I thought with Kirby, that's a good name for a journalist. And she fights for the truth, and she's wants criminals to be to ensure justice is served. So I thought that would be a good, strong name for her. Then on the other side, I have Gregory Longden, who is a jewels thief slash insurance investigator. And how I came up with Gregory was that I've always been a fan of Gregory Peck and Cary Grant. So I thought, oh, dashing, handsome, strong character, also witty. So that's how I came up with my two protagonists' names. And then I also have the superintendent Oliver Burnell of Scotland Yard. And I thought, okay, this is in contrast to Gregory and Emmeline, a strong, he's a sturdy man, and to offset them. And then I have some villains and so on. So some of the villains, I chose names that I have never liked. So then it was easy creating the character because it's like someone evil, someone ruthless. Well, I don't like this name, so this is good. It fits the character. And then what I always try with my characters, I never have characters with the same name. So I have Emmeline. I wouldn't have another character in the story like Edward or Evelyn and so on. So each character is distinct and readers don't get confused with the names. You know, it starts with the same letter. So that's what I try to do, what I've continued to do with my books.
Okay. I think it sounds like you have a process that works for you. And I love the idea of naming somebody a name that you don't like.
Yeah.
I remember once attending a workshop where a writer said, you know, I had a girlfriend and things were going well and she dumped me and I didn't know what to do. I mean, I'd put her in this book and every morning I went downstairs to write and there she was. So I killed her.
Well, you know, that goes back to the old adage. You should never get an author mad because you will be the victim in her next book. Or his book.
I actually could run to the kitchen and grab a cup. I got that in the fourth Gideon Rhymes novel. His lover partner is a lawyer who's Latina, as my partner is Latina. Her name is Phoenix Trinidad. And Tanya was reading the book after it came out, sitting on the couch one day, and I walked by and said, "How you doing?" She said, "I was fine till I got shot." Because some of our friends use us as their picture of the characters. So she gave me a cup, said, "Don't piss off the writer. He may put you in a book and kill you." Let me just say one thing. When I came up with the character of Phoenix Trinidad, her original name was Phyllis. Her father was Puerto Rican, her mother an African-American nurse, and her original name was Phyllis. But she changed it to Phoenix after a mastectomy. And a scene in the book, a reveal, is that when she had the mastectomy, she could not afford reconstructive surgery. So instead, she had a phoenix tattooed on her chest, and she changed her name to go along with it. That was something that I thought would be an interesting way to approach that character. Also, to keep that character fashionable and desirable without having stereotyped body measurements and all the other stuff that goes along with it. I wanted the person to be real.
And then to like rise like the phoenix in the myth, to rise from the fire.
She has a line in the first book which says, "I rose from the ashes of my own life," um,
Wow.
which was part of the reason for that name. And so
Well,
yes,
sorry, I mean, as a to go off on that, it's, you know, everybody changes, like nobody stays the same. So we have to do the same thing with characters. So characters have to evolve. So each of us in each book, you know, you're rising from the ashes again from where you were in the last one. So it's an evolving process.
I can tell that your characters are real to you, and that's important. Vicky, you had your hand up before. Do you want to?
Well, I was just going to talk about the problem of renaming a character.
Okay.
My my the character in my novel is an architect, and his name was Archer Landis. But somebody said that sounds too much like some other person. So I changed his name, and it's so difficult. And sometimes as I read a lot of thrillers and mysteries to review them, I can tell that the author changed the name of the character whom they had totally identified with to some other name, and they forget to change all those names. So you're reading along, and all of a sudden the person has a different first name. So I really would caution against it. If you find a name that really works for you, just keep it. Don't pay any attention to what other people say about it.
Well, I think that's more a typewriter problem than a computer problem if you do a search and replace. You just have to remember to search and replace
Well, yeah,
everything about the name, because you might have a nickname. If his name is Michael and then you refer to him as Mike once or twice, and you just replace Michael, you're in trouble. So you have to think that completely through it, including punctuation and
exactly.
commas and other things.
You would think that, but it's amazing how often it happens that it's not perfect.
Oh no, I've seen it happen. A friend of mine said, "Are there no editors anymore who are paying attention?"
Or not.
Right.
Okay, Francie.
Yeah, I I come from journalism, so I've kind of done the opposite. I've taken the fictional names off to make things more objective. But I'm working on going in the fictional direction right now. I just had two comments. One is, did you did you purposely take the same initials for Gideon Rhymes as yourself?
Yes,
You did, of course. That was smart. And two, I'm a cancer survivor, and that is really on the nose what you did with your Phoenix character. Uh,
thank you.
and it represents a lot of women's journey. They actually do recommend tattooing to help people get through it, but you probably know that from your research. So that's all.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, I did that. I not my better half, but my former wife, um, and other people I have known and cared for have had that journey, and I I thought that's part of the population. I want my people to be real. I want them to have, you know, real characteristics, real issues, real problems, real consequences in their lives and relationships. And everything about you has an impact on your relationships, on your friendships, your romantic
Yeah.
relationships, your family relationships. If you're a very unpleasant person, that'll have an impact on how people interact with you and see you. Okay, and I'm seeing, I guess I'm seeing hands go up. Okay, so let me respond to that. Abul Fazl, is there a, yes, your hand is up. I'm responding.
I use a different system, and I was curious to know a grandmaster like Gary's opinion. Uh, I draw inspiration from actual historical figures, and that's probably because in my story, every character is representative of an actual social or historical perspective, a certain movement, a philosophy.
Mhm. And you're asking my take on that?
Yes, because I hadn't thought about it, but now I realize that what you're using doesn't seem to have any similarity to mine.
um I think when characters have historical names, that they have a certain weight to them. And let me just look at the recent series of Planet of the Apes films, and the ape who seemed to forge the future was named Caesar. That carries a tremendous amount of weight in terms of his impact on the series, even though at this point in the series, he is dead. I think names can be bland. I mean, for example, as a student, as a teacher rather, and I taught for 45 years, I've had um, Anne Oakley as a student. I've had Lois Lane as a student. Um, my oldest friend, Duane, he and his late wife Sheila decided to name their son Darnell. Good call. Sheila's favorite name, which my son has, is David. And that would have gone fine, except we're boomers and everybody would remember because their last name is Crockett. So names, names carry a weight with them even when they're recognizable. There was many of you probably know the story of how Ian Fleming named his most famous creation. A book of ornithology was sitting on his table, written by the ornithologist James Bond. Now, Fleming wanted a bland name that didn't stand out because spies should be bland and not stand out. Of course, we've got 70 plus years of, or 70 years of history. I think Casino Royale was published in 53, that have made the spy so well known that I don't see how he could be a spy. You know? in the movie Die Another Day, he escapes after spending 14 months in a North Korean prison camp, shows up in Hong Kong in tattered clothes, barefoot, a chest-length beard, and asks for his usual room and gets it. So, that belies the idea of the spy being someone undercover. But the name came about, and over time, names gather weight. If I say to you, I am tired of seeing, I've had this criticism about film, about comic book films. I'm tired of seeing Martha Wayne's pearls bounce on the wet pavement. Okay? We know what we're talking about because the name has been carried. I'm tired of seeing Peter cradle Uncle Ben as he dies. The name carries weight if it's a strong enough name. If he was Uncle Terwilliger, it would be hard to do that. You know, Uncle Terwilliger died and Peter was Uncle Terwilliger. Who the hell would name somebody Terwilliger? So we have to think about how the names fit as well. Let's see. Ellen, your hand is up also.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. Okay. I just love this topic, so I wanted to jump on. And I like how you're introducing it. And I love the idea from my own experiences of literature about naming. But I had a book published that was based on an historical murder in the 1850s, and I used real characters, so I did not change their names. But I was
No fear
really,
of lawsuits at that point, though.
you what?
No fear of lawsuits from the 1850s.
Well, what I did was I did a lot of Googling, right? No fear of lawsuits, but I wanted to find out even certain genealogies and who might still be alive, who would care. And there's a whole thing about that. But I've recently written, it's sort of under proposal now. It's a contemporary novel. That one was published a while ago, but this one is a contemporary novel with younger people. And I'm using a first person protagonist who the name is not revealed. And I started out doing it nameless, meaning I didn't even know my protagonist's name. And I don't know if you know, like The Haunting of Hill House, but Shirley Hill did that. And certain people have done that because when you're on the interior voice or even in the experiences of somebody first person, they don't go around saying their own name. And for the most part, let's say, the other people might say their name if you're recording dialogue or something but in the end, I did a kind of a reveal where it's not the whole story. It's not the mystery or the thing that has to be revealed, but I named her Cecilia after the Simon and Garfunkel song. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because it had weight, because there's a whole search into her past and her family, and things are revealed, and her early years. But it comes up very, very late. And Celia, that would be the short version or the nickname of Cecilia. And then I was really testy. I'm still a little testy about this because it's still in manuscript form. It could be changed, but her other half is Duncan Treadwell, and I kind of got stuck on that name. I like that name. He's a Brit. He's young, and he's a kind of a software genius engineer type. And then he has an antagonist. Her antagonist in classical music, is her career, is Eve. And I got stuck on that. She has no last name, but Eve, just kind of all about Eve, and Eve, this woman that's trying to take over her position. So I came upon these names, and the protagonist to the software guy is Sigmund. And I really like that one because it kind of sticks out, because nobody's called Sigmund nowadays. And he's just this other Brit, hip guy, but, he ended up with the name Sigmund. And in England, maybe you don't think that much about it. But so he stands out, and he has a kind of a nefarious, he's an antagonist. But those four people, there are other minor characters. And one of them, I told a friend of mine, there was a Viennese music teacher or something, and I called him Mr. Luvish because I have a friend whose father was named that, and it's unspellable and unpronounceable, but I got so stuck on it. And she was so flattered. I can't believe you're using the name Luvish in your book. And it's spelled Luwisch. And finally, I thought, I got to kind of whitewash that for the reader, meaning how many readers. I just don't want to get readers stuck up on these weird spellings and things that are hard to pronounce. I'm almost thinking now I should change it back, because I like when things kind of stick out in that Dickensian way, like way off. And he's not a major character, but what I'm saying is to have a few names like that, and not just your run of the mill sort of American youth, names. But I love the topic, and I could think about it forever. I could also overthink it. So I'm really interested to hear what other people say and how they come up with the names that they're using.
A writer overthink something?
Oh, heaven forbid.
Well, like you said, search and then replace, and you do that how many times?
Yeah, you wind up doing it a lot. But let's see, there are other hands. Let's see. Nancy, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Me?
Nancy Novik?
Oh,
Where?
Yes, thank you. Hi.
Okay,
Yes, I'm
yeah,
just,
these pictures are dancing around, so I'm looking
yeah,
around
for
to
me
move.
too. Yeah. I am curious whether others do what I tend to do with minor characters. I like to name them after teachers that had a lot of influence on me. So a favorite English teacher changed her name a little bit from Rousseau to Rose. My French teacher appears as Madame Capsis in one of my stories. And then besides teachers, apropos of Dickens, who's been coming up, there's a story I'm sure some people know. There was a young woman he was in love with, Maria Beadnell, who rejected him early in his career because he was not going to be successful enough or he wasn't making enough money. And years later they met, and of course, then he was the famous author. So I named a character after her just for fun, just to have a little bit of Dickens in a story.
Well, I think that's delightful to do that, and you bounce again to another side of the screen. When we name characters after people, I think they become tributes. My late cousin Bobby was 7 months my senior, and we grew up like brothers. And he fought long-term illness. And when I was doing my first mystery novel, I'd published another novel and several short stories along the way in the late, about around 2015. The book came out in 2017. He said, I want you to put me in your book and make me the vilest villain imaginable. I said, I can't do that. So I put his name was Bobby, and I put his name on my detective's godfather who raised him. And Bobby's a retired English professor like me, so he has some qualities of mine. And my cousin Bobby was a banker, and he was always very smart about reading and understanding people. So, so I he read the first two books, and then he passed away before the third book came out. And no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He passed away before the second book came out. I think I sent him parts of it, but he passed away before the book came out. And when I think of him and I go back in, I do the description and say things he says, it lets me reconnect with someone I love. And I think that's sometimes a nice thing to do if you're going to name a character after somebody in your life. And having taught for a long time, I have to say, on behalf of teachers everywhere, we're honored when that happens. We're honored because teachers have an important role to play, and they're all too often overlooked.
Yeah.
Okay, Jenna, your hand is up.
Yeah, I've had people comment on the age of the names of my characters. So I do a Google for whatever year I want the character to have been born, and then most popular names of such and such a year. And then I decide, do I want the character to have a common name or to have an unusual name? So that's one of my considerations, besides, the kind of sounds of the names and associations.
Good idea, checking the year.
Somebody else checks. Oh, okay, Nancy. Yeah, somebody you check the year also. That's you have a system and the system is working. Danielle, your hand is up again.
Yeah, I wanted to bring something up that Ellen brought to mind because she mentioned about the writing in the first person, and that brings to mind the Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. The narrator of the story is the second Mrs. De Winter, and you never know her for she's very naive. She's in awe of Rebecca, who was the first, and I think not having her, not having a name. I think Daphne du Maurier increases the suspense because you're like, who is this? And she's telling the story. She knows things, but I think just calling her the second Mrs. De Winter enhances the suspense and propels the story even more.
Yes, yes, a wonderful, wonderful book, by the way.
One of my favorites.
It's exquisitely written, and that's one of the features. Another book I can think of where the name of the central character is not revealed until well into the book is Ira Levin's A Kiss Before Dying. if you know that book. And it's no, the book was published, I don't know, 54, 55, somewhere in there. The film was 56 or 57 with Robert Wagner as Burton Corliss. So I'm not spoiling the reveal on the name, but the name is important in that respect. And as a tribute to that, I have a play that'll be done in the 2020 the 25-26 season, wherein a doctor who is the husband of one of my regular detectives is kidnapped by white supremacists who did not want him to operate on their child. They wanted a white doctor. And in this play, the dead son is a member of the Corliss family, and he's Bud Corliss, like Burton Bud Corliss in A Kiss Before Dying. And there's a link or an explanation to that without the characters realizing exactly what they did in naming their child. But I read that book, well, I don't know, I think I was in high school. And I was just blown away by that book. I thought, okay. And I thought it'd be nice to name a character who's not active in the book, but reference the book in that process in the play. So, Ellen.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I don't want to take up, I don't know if other people are, I wanted to jump in at just about another point that comes up with me.
Sure.
Is that what I do is I have a file that's just called names. I mean, it's something that I can find. And I wish I was more prolific because I don't have enough books to fill all these great names, but I save names in case I ever need them. And one of the really interesting ways that I found to find names is when you're on like Netflix or IMDb and they do the credits, and especially on IMDb because you can cut and paste them, but they have all of these people that worked on films, especially if they're international, which lends itself to a lot more kind of interesting names and, you know, a variety of sort of regions. But I'm just reading off some of mine from my names file. Someone once told me about this couple named Wolfgang and Mary, and I said, I got to do a book about a couple named Wolfgang and Mary. I just love the names. But then there's, this is on my names file, Roderick Burns, Socrates Otto, this is a real person, Ben Oxenblood, Penelope Knipe, and then it goes down because I really save a lot of them. Finn Whitrock, I've always liked that one. Luke Treadaway, and Travis Jeffrey, Hugh Cupper. So it's kind of a fun way to find names. And here's one, Genevieve Lemon. So in my list, and this is kind of a cut and paste thing, it's something to refer back to. And you'd be surprised, especially for productions that are not, you know, they're sort of American, and, you know, and on Netflix they're American and joint with many other nationalities and production companies abroad, and they could be even in, you know, the Middle East and the Eastern Europe and Russian and all that. So it's kind of a fun way to find names.
I am an inveterate credit reader. As someone who has had wives, children, friends say, I'll meet you in the lobby. I read the credits because the names, I would never have thought of a name like that. And I'll make a note if it comes to that. And I am actually, and I'm glad you mentioned IMDb, because this is one I waited for and saw. My cousin Bobby, who passed away, his daughter Anidra went to film school, and she now works for Marvel. She was on the special effects team for Black Panther 2. So for Bobby, I sat and looked at the credits, scanning everyone until I saw Anidra Edwards. But she posted on Facebook at one point a still so that you could see her name was in the credits. And that's That's
Well, Anitra is a good name right there. I like that.
yes, yes.
Someone's going to steal it.
But I can't use, well, you can use it. I can't because I'm Uncle Gary. You can do it. I don't use I generally don't use the names of my children or my nieces and nephews and godchildren and things like that, because I want to come up with different names. And I have a huge family, which means I have to I can play with names. I can definitely do that. For example, I have a cousin named Laura, a sister named Lori, a couple of friends named Lori, 3 friends named Lori. And so I might do a Laurel, but I don't use Laura or Lori because I'm related to them. So, okay, I'm looking. Okay, Nancy.
I'm trying to unmute. Can you?
Wait, now you're muted. I generally don't interfere. So you unmute yourself.
Okay, how's that? Okay.
That's fine.
But well, by the time I was writing my 7th mystery novel, I was just pulling out of names, ideas for names, and I was never any good at it anyway. I had been through baby books, graduations from large high schools. I'd been through my family's English surnames. I'd been all through all kinds of things. So I did a little competition, a little in my newsletter. I offered a free book for people who could come up with a new name. And one of my college friends came up with the name Clementine. Now it was one of several, but I didn't have a character that Clementine would fit. But if you read my 7th mystery novel, the alpaca is named Clementine, aka Clemmy. So I used the name there. But I had a little competition via my newsletter.
Well, that works just fine. There was my detective was bodyguarding a singer in the first book, and her name was Indigo Waters.
Oh, cool.
And Indy for short. And I don't know where it came from. It popped into my head at one point. And because sometimes, raise your hands if you've ever had a name just pop into your head. That's See, I think there's something about being a writer where certain experiences become common. We don't fully understand how some of those things work, but they do. Another suggestion I have for that is there are lots of dice games that have types of dice with letters. Take a handful, throw them, and see what your letters come up with. Or play with your Scrabble tiles or something like that. We play a lot of Scrabble. But then see what you come up with. You might come up with something that is unusual and that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. There's a certain playfulness to writing, whatever you're writing. There's a certain playfulness to it. And I think sometimes being playful will help you come up with a name. Now, when I did this a few times that I can recall, I was having a class about something, and a student made a comment or whatever, and that comment led to a name or in one case, a sentence. And so I would say, hold on. I'd say, huh? And I take out my notebook and write it down.
Yep.
And I used to tell my students, if you ever catch me without a pen, everybody in class gets $1. So whenever I walked into the room, who were they paying attention to? They never got the $1 because I always have a pen. I actually usually have 2 pens. So, can I borrow your pen? Sure. Do you have a pen? Yeah, and I'd pull out the second pen. So, but I'd write down something that's like, oh, wait, wow, that's a name I could use. And then slide back into whatever lesson was up there. Because, and I'm a strong believer in the idea of play. And I will quote the Star Trek episode Shore Leave, written by Theodore Sturgeon, which is a good name in and of itself. Good science fiction writer, too. the more complex the mind, the greater the need for play. And I think that when you play, you come up with stuff that becomes useful and you enjoy it more. It feels less like work. Who wants to work at this point? Let's just have fun. George.
I guess you could call this playful. One thing that worked well for me with one character is changing the gender of a name I like. There's a friend of mine who was an AP editor. His name was Don, D-O-N, Don Kendall, a name that kind of rolls off the tongue. And I'm writing about a character similar to him, but she's a woman. So I changed the first name to Dawn, D-A-W-N, which still has a nice ring to it.
Yes.
Don
Yeah.
still might get a kick out of it.
Probably, because he would feel honored that that came up because, I mean, one of the things about being a writer is that people think they either think you're writing about them or they want you to write about them or both.
Yeah.
I've had people say, that character's based on me, isn't it? And sometimes I didn't have the heart to say no. I did such and such. Well, gee, I didn't know you had done such and such. Are you sure you want to confess under these circumstances? But yeah, you can certainly play around with those things. And names are curious. I remember when I was in, I think, first grade or second grade, there was a kid in my class, and I was, and his name was Lambert Glenn. But I was in first or second grade, and Lambert didn't sound like a first name to me. And I said, "No, you're Glenn Lambert." And he said, "No, I'm Lambert Glenn." It just didn't click. I mean, because when we're kids, we're stupid. We have to learn. Well, no, we are. We're dumb when we're kids. We don't know everything. We'd like to, and we're busy trying to make sense of our world. And saying something like that is also trying to make sense of our world. So, he finally convinced me he was who he was. And I walked away thinking, Lambert can be a first name. Didn't occur to me at that point when I was 6 years old. Vicky.
A lot of times when I read short stories in Alfred Hitchcock or Ellery Queen, the main character's name that's been assigned sounds so off to me. I don't know why it sounds wrong. It doesn't sound like, it sounds like a made-up name. It doesn't really sound real. But when I'm a lot of times when I'm writing, I have a need for a character from another ethnicity or another country or another background or whatnot. And how I go about researching that, because I'm too lazy, like Ellen, to compile this list of names from the movie credits, which I also watch mainly for weird tasks that people have been assigned rather than what their names were. But anyway, I go to I look up the newspapers from that country or area, and the especially the sports statistics, because they'll have all these names of soccer players or whatnot that I would never. And these names sound quite plausible to me. So I look there for. It's a quick way to find them.
Okay.
Good idea.
That's yes. Online, there are various ethnic name sites. There are also name generators, the Elizabethan name generators, Dickens name generators, and you can plug into those if you want. But I think what we're all showing here tonight is that we're all involved as writers in the process of being aware that we're writers all the time. Case in point. Now, my first marriage ended in divorce, and my children, my former wife took a position at Bucknell University, which is a 5-hour drive from Buffalo. So I would go down one weekend a month to see my children. And when I was working on my first novel, which was not a mystery, but an historical novel, I needed a name for a character. And I would drive through or past Buttonwood, Pennsylvania at least once a month. Okay. If I had like a long weekend, I'd go down early, get them, bring them back, and then take them back on Sunday or Monday. But I was coming up with a character who was the antagonist. And I happened to hear somehow, maybe I was listening to a book as I was driving down. I used to do a lot of that. As I was passing through Buttonwood, somebody said something about Eustace. And in my head, Eustace Buttonwood. There's a name. And the first name Eustace gave me a backstory to give him motivation, that he's nicknamed Useless. And now the novel takes place in 1901, so that name would have fit the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, they called him Useless Buttonwood, and he was determined to be something else. So I had an idea that just came from a drive. And signs, for example, originally one of the names I was thinking of for my detective was Haven Lock, because I passed the town of Lock Haven. But a good friend of mine has a son named Haven. And our children are all middle-aged at this point, all in their 40s. So she had named her son Haven, and I thought I can still hold on to that. It's still an idea for a name at some point, because I'm not close enough to him that it would be a problem. It's not like I would say Brandon, and I would hear, Uncle Gary, how could you do that to me? That's not how it would work. But yeah, we pick up our names wherever we can, just as we pick up our plots wherever we can.
Sure.
What about characteristics of the characters we make? I mean, we've spent a lot of time. I see a question here. What malady is tattooing being recommended for women? If you came in late, before breast reconstruction was required in most health plans, a woman who had a mastectomy had to take care of reconstruction costs herself. And so many women before breast reconstruction was available went to tattooing, or having themselves tattooed, having the scars tattooed over after a mastectomy. So that's where that came from. I just happened to see that question. But characteristics of the people we create, how do we view them? Do their names lead to, like Eustace Buttonwood? Hey, they can call him Useless. So that gives me something to go. So I'm looking for hands to see. Don.
There you go.
Well, just as an aside, you mentioned Bucknell. My daughter graduated from Bucknell, so there's an interesting night. One of the things that I've noticed in finding names, the first thing I look at is the characteristics of the person that I'm trying to name.
Right.
What is this person? And I've got a character named Ray Cromwell because I wanted to use the initials RC after one of my heroes, Raymond Chandler, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the Raymond. I was going to use Raymond at any cost, but I needed a last name, and I came up with Cromwell after sifting through about 1,000 names beginning with a C, and just because one of his heroes, not one of his heroes, one of his interests, I should say, is English history, and of course everybody knows
Oliver Cromwell.
Cromwell, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that became the last name, and that's how I came up with that.
Okay. When we've talked about these things as the craft of writing, I'm amazed and appreciative that you all have something you're doing with this, something that you've gone through a process of thinking things through. That in and of itself is amazing. you could put a bunch of people in a room who are not writers, and they would not think about stuff like that. They would come up with sometimes things that just don't work. But you're putting your hearts into it, and that's always a good thing. And I did want to comment on the idea of fictional characters being avatars for their authors or fictional representations. Yeah, my detective has my same initials, Gideon and Rhymes. And if you know how to spell Gideon, same number of syllables, the E is in the middle. So James Bond and Ian Fleming smoked the same cigarettes and had the same golf handicap. Kinsey Milhone and Sue Grafton. Kinsey Milhone was Sue Grafton's approach. My friend Lisa Marie Redmond says her character, Lauren Riley, is not her, but they share initials. So it's writers do kind of live their fantasies out, and that's absolutely fine. You know, it's much better to have a fantasy where you're killing people than a reality where you're killing people. And it's much better to have a fantasy where you figure out how somebody has killed someone else and reflect some. Okay, I'm looking for another hand at this point because.
Well, let's see if I can get it.
Okay, Francie?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that when I'm naming a character, I come from broadcasting and journalism. I think about the person and I kind of see them in a room or in action, and I think about them and what they're thinking and what they might be doing, and from that, I have a theory about what their name is because I'm looking at them, So, that looks like George to me,
Yes.
And the place where I found it the most difficult is if this person is a lot like me. Then, I don't want to pick the name, boy, because it's me. But it might not be me, but it's pretty close to me, like you were just giving your examples, or maybe she's knows a lot of stuff that I know, and that's when it stops. I try to go past that and pretend it isn't happening, but I noticed that I have no trouble naming all the other people, but when I have to name the one that's like me, that's where it gets a little funky sometimes. But
yeah, that happens. I had one of the villains in one of my books is a character who was named Lorenzo Quick, and he had gold vampire fangs that had been surgically added. They were extra long canines, not too much, but it was an intimidation.
Was that in the 80s?
No, this was actually I met a guy who had that done in the 80s. Yes.
It was big then. I mean, I wrote a lot of news stories about it.
I only met one person who was like that, and I thought, I'm going to put you in a book someday.
Yeah.
And the guy I met wasn't particularly nice, and so I thought, I'm going to make a villain out of you. But I forget what this person's name was, but I don't know. Lorenzo and Quick came into my head at the same time, and I thought, Lorenzo Quick, that works, and I went with it. So.
And I had one other question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Has anyone ever gotten really angry at seeing their name in one of your books? But
that's I've not named characters myself after real characters. I bounce around. So no, I don't think anybody's gotten angry with that. People have said this is, well, I know one person who
or their story, their name or their story, either one.
The story, yeah. It was a woman I'd been seeing for a while, and I didn't kill her in a story, but
You were waited till the book
I wrote
came
a
out.
story that had some interactions that we had had, and she
Right.
read the story and was furious. I'm thinking, okay, you're a writer too, don't you take from
Reality. Yeah.
yeah. So, but other than that, no. Generally, I haven't had people get angry with me about that, and it's you take and you create a character, but then you exaggerate because writing is a lot like caricature.
Yeah.
The guidebook for caricature will tell you if the person has a large nose, show no mercy when you draw the picture. Think of the caricatures of Charles de Gaulle, for example, that were in the newspapers a lot when I was a kid. Um, those things, that's how that stuff works.
Okay.
So, uh, other hands, we're Daniela, and we
Well, just and not so much with the names, but what you're referring to characteristics, and are you as the author your character? Well, I think for most of us, a little bit of each character is part of you. You put a little bit of it, and to that point, that gives you and your characters, you, an opportunity through your characters through a conversation, something you wish you would have said in an argument, something you would have reacted to. It gives you the opportunity to
yes.
actually follow up on that. You say, oh yeah, that would have been a good thing to put in there. So it lends itself to so many things. The dialogue, the situation that the characters in, it all comes from you because it's all part of your mind. You're the conjurer.
Yeah, the line you thought of 5 minutes too late.
Right, exactly. That's exactly. It's like that would have been perfect. But
Yes.
you're the conjurer, so your books, your characters can be anything, and you can fulfill that missed opportunity that you had in real life.
Well, sometimes, and this is just a story of how sometimes things will work in your favor. Um, I was on a university committee that was meeting with our president, and a really nice man whom I hope he's resting in peace. But we were in a meeting, and one of my colleagues referred to him as doctor, and he hated to be called doctor. And he said, "Don't call me doctor. Every time somebody calls me doctor, I feel like I should give a rectal exam." And we have maybe 15 or 20 people at this long conference table, and everybody stopped because they didn't know what to do, except Mr. Smartass, who said, "Well, we can't sit still for that." And it sort of broke things up. And it's just, you're right. You do want your character to reflect the part of you that doesn't get aired often enough. That's true. But also, we're complex.
That's true.
So, I mean, if we write about people who are different from us, and I used to do that in workshops, write about somebody who is different from you. And yeah, I've been told you write women very well. Well, I mean, I have sisters. I had a wonderful mother, grandmothers, aunts. I know women, I think, and when I try to write women, I try to write women who are real. And it's like if you're brought up in this culture, American culture, you're exposed to a wide range of emotions, a wide range of characteristics, and you adopt some of them. And I suppose I've had some theater training, and I suppose that helps because I start imagining characters and giving them voices and other things, which sometimes people say, "You're on there talking all by yourself. Are you all right?" No, I'm fine. This is how I work. It's a little after 7. Thank you all for coming. I hope to see you next month. We have, hold on a second. We're having a guest next month, and it has to do with writing across genres, intersecting genres. And so I'll be talking with her beforehand, and we'll get together and have some fun.
Right. Gary, thank you. This is an excellent session.
Thank you. Thank you all for participating, and thank you for tuning in. I'll
Okay, we'll
see
see you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.